One thing that is a constant working with data, working with machine learning, and now with AI, that's where my true passion lies. The more advanced you are in mathematics, the worse you get with arithmetics. Because at some point, numbers get replaced by letters, and English letters get replaced by Greek letters. AI is only going to be a tool to me. I am not hiring an AI. I'm hiring other humans. AI is a good tool to solve many problems, but it doesn't need to be the tool for everything.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show with Ben. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure's all mine.
It is absolutely our pleasure as well. And Ben, it would be great if you could kick things off by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself, just so they can learn a little bit about you and contextualize everything that we talk about today.
Absolutely. I'm currently a staff data scientist at Intuit, which is the company behind MailChimp, QuickBooks, TurboTax. You might have heard of some of these products. Prior to that, I actually started my career as a management consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, and I specialized in pricing. After that, I've had a series of jobs ranging from large corporates like Telstra all the way to very small nascent startups. And in a number of industries, actually, I've covered in telco, in fintech, healthcare analytics. But the one thing that is a constant is working with data, working with machine learning, and now with AI. And that's where my true passion lies.
That's a great intro, and we'll certainly look to tap into that wide breadth of experience you've got in our conversation today. One area I'd love to start with is something I don't think we've spoken much about yet on the Objective Hiring podcast, and that is about career switches, people coming from outside the data field into the data field. And I've certainly noticed this trend, especially among kind of leadership positions, maybe because data expanded so quickly, maybe there wasn't enough talent available to kind of lead functions. And so I saw a bit of a trend of people coming maybe from marketing or some other fields into managed data teams. But yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on this kind of career switch into data, maybe also some perspective around what strengths and weaknesses these candidates might typically have for data roles.
Yes, of course. And first of all, I love career switches. Being one myself, I've had a very non-traditional switching from management consulting into data role, and now a very, very technical one these days. So I love career switches. What they tell me is they have a true passion for working with data. And career switching is not easy. I mean, coming from my own experience, I can tell you that you're always being judged against other candidates who have had a longer history in this particular profession. And the people do it, most people that I encountered do it because they really love doing working in data and working with statistics, mathematics, and that's why I do it. And that is what that's why these candidates are attractive to me as well, because I know that they have the passion and have the drive to want to work in this space and then can really get things done.
So they almost know your background and know you'd be receptive to someone also making that kind of career switch, and so they view you in a mentorship capacity in some sense. Do you think?
I don't think that's the case when candidates come to me. I mean, there is usually a number of filtering stages before that happens. So I doubt that they're attracted to apply to the role because of that. But maybe they do end up taking up the offer because of that. And of course, as always, top candidates have many options, and certainly in the situations where I've had candidates being made multiple offers, and I don't necessarily have the highest dollars to be able to entice them, but things are like the culture of the company, the management and the team then become elements of how I can try to so the sweeten the case without having extra money to necessarily or budget to throw at it role.
And so you mentioned one of the strengths of these candidates is that maybe it indicates like a true passion. If they're willing to kind of drop everything and go into data, then they must really want to do it. Um, is there anything else that has stuck out about these candidates? Like thinking back to the ones that you might have hired, any extra, I don't know, like other learnings they've taken from their old domain that were applicable, or some kind of maybe different mindset that they might have had to other people who'd be grown up in the domain.
Yes, indeed. Career switchers will have another role or function under their belt, and therefore they can often see from the user's perspective, the users of the information, the user of data, and therefore they can better understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and therefore what is going to be truly value add. We don't do data analytics or machine learning for the sake of doing it. There's just not enough hours in the day to be able to fulfill uh, our fantasy world of like building every model and testing things out. And therefore, how do we get to the value, to the outcome as quickly as possible? And if you have a good understanding of the context of the problem, that helps you set you apart.
I wonder if we're in this world where some of the super technical elements of some of these roles, like the coding itself, is being, let's say, automated away using large language models. And there's probably a point in the next 6 or 12 months where now a Claude instance or ChatGPT might be able to write code with 100% accuracy, maybe, and debatable, but we'll see. And that maybe the kind of coding component, as an example, might now be taken care of by you prompting an LLM to write it. Is there something then to be said for some of these data roles becoming relatively less technical, therefore almost lending themselves to a career switcher a bit more, someone who maybe has the domain expertise but not as much technical skill? Could you see these roles becoming slightly less technical in that respect?
I think it's going to become both more and less technical at the same time. It will become less technical to the point that you're talking about. Maybe the familiarity with the syntax and the language becomes less important. But what will be more important is asking the right questions. And I already talked about the asking the right questions from the context of the business application, but there's also asking the questions from a technical uh, aspect. So machine learning and AI is now an extremely complex area, and of course you can't just check things in and there's auto ML that will do things for you and that will get you a really really good result. But sometimes you got to strip back and say, I'm trying to achieve something that's different. The results that you're giving me is not going to be good enough. What else can I do to improve the performance of the model? And that's requires understanding of statistics, mathematics, computational efficiency, and algorithms. And you need to have that knowledge in order to actually make the models perform at a different level. We're talking about 10x better, not little bit 1 or 2% improvements. So in order to make those kind of leaps, you actually have to become more technical. So and hence why I said it's becoming both more and less technical at the same time. At least that's how I see the world heading.
Hmm. It's an interesting perspective. Like I've been thinking about this almost yin and yang battle a little bit recently and thinking, yeah, like are these roles going to become really people oriented, less technical, more like stakeholder engagementy, whatnot. But then, yeah, the other side of the spectrum is almost, but also trying to think about it in terms of like if I were, I don't know, 18 or 20 now, what would I be doing? Would I be trying to smash the people skills or smash the technical skills. And part of me thinks, well, actually, the combination of really strong machine learning, stats, AI knowledge, and programming to be able to automate things is probably now a lethal combination that has almost like an explosive value that's very, very scalable in a way that maybe the people stuff isn't as much. What do you think of that kind of spectrum?
Well, until machines overtake all of our jobs, I think there's always going to be elements of stakeholder management, people management in every profession. And of course, the degree of which you have to do that differs depending on the role itself and the level of seniority. But I don't see that going away anytime soon. And the other thing I want to emphasize is, yes, LLM is getting really good at writing the code and syntax. I still find that having sufficient level of understanding and being able to review the code is a very important and very valuable skill. At least until machines can write perfect code, which might happen very soon. It might happen this year. We don't know. But at least for me, I often get that aha moment when I look at a code and go, okay, this is why it's not giving me the right result. And the ability to debug. Actually, that's another really important one. Can you identify issues? Can you smell the errors in the data? Um, because even though it could run the code and execute successfully, doesn't mean that the numbers are right. And it doesn't mean it's not always the case that the code had an error. The error could have come from the underlying data. And therefore, there is no way for the LLM to know. And that's where all that business context and knowledge and everything in your experience becomes very important, and to know something is not quite right here. I need to go deeper. It could be the code, it could be the data, it could be any one of these things. And what do I need to do in order to address that?
That's a great point you make, that kind of data savviness, which if you've grown up doing analytics and you've just been there in the kind of raw row level data, checking these things and knowing, oh, like having this sense of like where things are likely to go wrong, which bit of the stack might have broken, as you say, then you just develop the sixth sense for testing things and go, I know, I'm pretty sure we forgot to filter out nulls. Or like, I reckon there could be some negative values in here. Like, it looks like there's an outlier. I know where this is probably coming from, or whatever. That kind of toolkit you get. What do you think then about maybe the really junior wave of candidates, almost like AI native candidates, who have just in their world, writing SQL is going to ChatGPT and saying, "Hey, write this," or their idea of analytics is saying, like, "Here's a data set, tell me some trends," where they've kind of missed the grunt work of actually almost like feeling the data at the row level. I feel like in the intermediate period where these AI systems are kind of good but not amazing, this certainly something that's lost among those junior candidates, or any candidate who's kind of coming to it without that foundational skill. What do you think?
Well, that's not so much. So that's not so different from the invention of calculators taking away our ability to do arithmetics. Really, has it made an impact on society as a whole? It definitely has, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, I personally still value the ability to write SQLs because over it's we frequently write SQLs that are pages and pages long, and they are really complex because you have to get data from multiple sources and you have to massage them and then combine them and then massage them again and spit out answers in a different way. And I learned how to do that by struggling through, like you said. And so I now have the skills and the process to be able to dissect it and really break it into really tiny pieces and knowing what to look out for at each step before I assemble the whole thing together. And a really key thing is knowing what to test and what to look out for at each step. So I do wonder what will happen to the data analysts who are starting their career right now, because you're right, they might not need to write SQL the same way that we used to struggle them through the same way, but they might still encounter the same data issues and the same errors in the outcomes, and therefore still have to go through those debugging things. And one other element that isn't there yet is the LLMs don't know about the data structure. And therefore, you still have to feed it the information. This is what my schema looks like. These are the tables, and these are the columns within the tables. It still doesn't know anything about the quality of data that lies within the warehouses. So it can't tell you. Actually, it came out of a work meeting today, and we were looking at some results of an experiment, and it somehow didn't make sense. But it took someone very experienced to tell us, well, actually, that table might be missing certain data from a period of time because there was an error from a front end. Some logs were not recorded, and therefore, it's okay. So LM is not going to know about any of these things.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how things develop, and hopefully we get this kind of new wave of AI-driven BI tools that are, I guess, sitting in the warehouse as a user, maybe have all this extra context about where the data's come from, and maybe that's going to need like a lot of almost like extra documentation to be written about the data, because I imagine a lot of companies wouldn't even have this stuff documented. Information about the different bits of the stack, as you say, like here's the data collected on the front end, here's how it's collected, here's the back end, here's the this and the that. But I feel like we're still a way off that kind of technology coming.
A little way off. I mean, yes, you can fine tune your LLM to generate SQLs that is relevant to your organization, because you can feed it historical SQLs so it knows about the data structures and the tables, etc. But institutional knowledge like that, not necessarily embedded in SQL itself. So it will also not know about any of the new tables or new schemas that's being created. So yes, you can feed it context and through techniques like RAG to say here are new tables, but it's not going to get generated out of the LLM by default. I'm pretty sure there are some really smart people out there that are solving these exact problems, and let's wait a few months and see.
Fingers crossed. One thing I know from particularly software engineers is, sometimes when they're trying to solve a problem, it's not that they have a perfect blueprint or this 100% articulated Jira ticket that they just have to go and mechanically create. It's in the writing of the code that the solution almost emerges. It's like the writing is the thinking. Is there another thought there around maybe us losing some of that if we're no longer writing code, we're going to write a prompt to write a code? Are we going to lose some ability to think, or is it just, well, not really, because now we have to think really carefully about how we articulate it so that the LLM can write the code with the way you want it to?
I think that is one possibility, that you have to articulate your design criteria and better in order for the LLM to generate the right outcome. But it also allows us to iterate faster. So being a data enthusiast, the first thing I do whenever I get a new data set is I play with it. I do all sorts of exploratory analysis, and I go, oh, what about this? What about that? What if I cut it this way? What if I decide it that way? Can I do a scatter plot? Can I do a bar chart? Can I do a violin chart? I would, if I have the time, I would actually spend hours and hours just purely looking at data and thinking about it different ways. I can just get a sense of it. And I think the LLMs just makes it faster to be able to do all these things.
Just a more efficient way for you to even explore things in those initial stages.
Precisely.
One thing you mentioned earlier was kind of the analog between the development of AI and then the development of the personal calculator. And so, we were discussing, does that make almost like mental arithmetic redundant? I can remember going for grad roles 14 years ago in consulting and investment banking. And banking in particular, they love to throw the mental maths problems at you, like what's 47 divided by 19 to the nearest three decimal places or some bullshit. And I found some level of dread in having to do these, I can tell you. And I had to teach myself how to do like 3 by 3 multiplications in my head without having a complete mental breakdown. And that was 14 years ago, when already, I felt like that was a fairly redundant skill. Is is there anything that we're currently asking in interviews now that's going to look as ridiculous in, I don't know, 10 years' time, that's just going to be completely pointless and completely redundant, a skill that we no longer need because AI just wipes the floor with us?
It's a good question because I went through very similar interviews when I got my job in consulting, and I won't say how many years ago because that just made me look really really old. and but there, and the other funny thing I should say is the more advanced you are in mathematics, the worse you get with arithmetics, because at some point numbers get replaced by letters, and the English letters get replaced by Greek letters, and at that point, you really don't you have no idea how to do any mental arithmetics anymore, and therefore going back to those interviews, and people are going to ask you, what is 49 divided by 38? It's like, oh, I have to think about it. How do you write it in the Greek alphabets? And then maybe I'll answer that question. So yes, it was a very interesting experience. A good question. What skills will become redundant 10, 15 years from now with the presence of LLM? I think writing SQL probably will be one of those that go first, because it is the easiest to standardize, and really you could really get a code to run and execute. And I would say, uh, interestingly enough, I wonder if the ability to create PowerPoint presentations, at least simple ones, will go away, and because LLMs will be better at structuring communications, and therefore synthesize information and spit it out into pretty looking charts, and maybe that skill also becomes obsolete as well. So those are the potentials. Let me just ask ChatGPT to see if it agrees with me on those ones.
Well, yeah, ChatGPT, I know, often gives a very kind of politically correct answer, likes to stoke our ego a bit. I feel like if it was being really honest, it would say, listen, there's going to be no more human to human communication. AI is going to take over. Like my great 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 grandson is going to be your ruler. So don't worry about it. but we will see. Uh, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and think now about AI in the hiring context, because I personally have become very much an AI optimist. I feel like the way hiring's been done traditionally has a lot of issues, um, often very tedious, very manual, incredibly biased. I think that AI could potentially solve a lot of these issues. Have you started to explore using AI in hiring at all? Have you seen candidates use AI on their side?
The most obvious one is the CV or the resume, and I have seen technologies that promises to craft and or tailor your CV to each job that you apply to, or if not the CV, maybe a section of the CV or the cover letter itself. So that's an obvious one. Um, of course, the danger is if it hallucinates and it's no longer representing you as the candidate. I think that's very dangerous. And believe it or not, that is not the most tedious part of the hiring process. Uh, the the tedious part is the time consuming part really is the interview itself. Now, I know that AI can do interviews. I know there are companies out there that have offered AI interview services. But as a candidate and also as a hiring manager, it is one step that I haven't gone to. And because I'm a human, I am going to be working with other humans primarily. And AI is only going to be a tool to me. I am not hiring an AI, I'm hiring other humans. So the biases that you talk about are part of being human. I have to know beyond the technical skills of the candidate that we can have good reports, we can communicate and understand each other. I can assign tasks and deadlines and knowing that they will be adhered to. And if there are issues, I have to expect that people to be coming to me and raise them with me and we solve them together. I don't know if AI is able to get to all those nuances just yet. Maybe it is. Um, but that's a two-way thing because the bias could be me. Maybe I have a deficiency as a manager is centered in one of these skills, and therefore relying on the candidate to complement myself. So I actually I actually say those biases, unfortunately or fortunately, exist in the world, but that is part of who we are. And if I would give an example, and this could be a very controversial one. If I have a candidate who has very strong accent to the point that I have difficulty understanding them, they could have the best technical skills in the world, but I won't be able to hire them because I can't communicate with them.
I feel like this is now we're getting to some of the meat of the topic here. So I think this is a really good place to drill down. I feel like in that particular example, um, yes, you or anyone else will be biased against the candidate who has that accent. But if the criteria for the role is strong communication skills and it's a fundamental bit of their job, you're being biased in the same sense as you hire someone who already has SQL skills and Python skills. You're kind of biased against people who don't know SQL, you could say. But I feel like that's completely fair game because it's part of the criteria for the role. Where I feel like AI could help a lot is with um, biased for things that are irrelevant to the actual role. So I'll give you an example um, of an experiment done in Sydney, actually, by the University of Sydney, I think in 2023 from memory. The researchers got thousands of different CVs, bucketed them into three groups. First group, or these three groups of CVs were basically similar, except for one thing on them, which was the names. First bucket of CVs had an Anglo first and last name. Second bucket had Chinese first name, Anglo last name. Third group had Chinese first and last name. And they applied to thousands of different roles around Sydney and Melbourne, different industries, different domains, different seniorities. Like, I think they did a pretty good job at controlling for many different factors. And then they measured the rate at which these buckets of CVs got a callback, literal callback or an email back, whatever. And from memory, roughly the rates were first bucket 12%, third bucket 4%. So in other words, you applied to a job in Australia with an English Anglo first and last name, you had three times the number of callbacks as if you applied with a Chinese first and last name. Particularly relevant for yourself, actually, because you would fall into bucket 2 out of those three. So you would have an 8% chance of getting a callback versus a 12% chance if I applied for a role, which, given they control for so many other factors, look like a pretty good natural experiment to me. I feel like that would be a good example of where AI could improve that kind of scenario. What do you think?
Yes and no. So yes, you're right. I remember that study very well, and I was much younger then, and it had a really big impact on my career as well, because I definitely have been in those situations. But isn't AI a little bit of a sledgehammer for that particular problem? All you need to do is to not have the names shown to the recruiter, and you automatically remove that problem. So AI is a good tool to solve many problems, but it doesn't need to be the tool for everything.
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. Although even the process to remove a name successfully from a CV, I think, could be done quite well with ChatGPT. Like this, I don't think was a solved problem a couple of years ago. Because then yeah, you've got the name, but then you've got other things which would. That's just one example, but there's like, well, how old are they? You can kind of infer that by when they finished high school if they've got that on there. In places like United States, they say, I think there's a saying that's something like, "Tell me your postcode, and I'll tell you how rich you are." So, like the exact neighborhood or postcode of a city is very indicative of socioeconomic status, maybe in a way that isn't quite the same in Australia, um, and other things like that. So then there's a case of these things that I feel like are clearly irrelevant, but then there's other things that are maybe on the gray zone, borderline of what may or may not be relevant. For example, what about hobbies? For me, hobbies really don't come into it. Like, why do I need to know that someone likes to play piano if I'm hiring them for a software engineering role, or they like to take their dog for a walk on the beach at Clovelly? Like, I don't. Well, why does that matter? But then other people say it gives you like a flavor of the candidate and gives you a sense of their personality. And if they do all these other things, it indicates like a growth mindset. What do you think about then the hobbies and those things that fit in the gray area?
Oh, very, very interesting one. Because I did put playing piano on my CV as hobby. I can't remember whether it's still there or not, but it's an interesting one. Uh, I don't know. When I review when I review CVs, I tend to not place too much in the hobby section, to a point that it's really not that relevant uh, to the hiring role. I I will look at the years of experience, though. That is something that we'll look into, and where they were educated, and what roles they had in the past, what industries. Those to me are important. So whether that's considered a bias or whether it's considered as part of the evaluation criteria, I think that is up to the individuals.
I remember now trying to hire a product analyst a few years ago in Sydney when I was working with Hotels Combined, and reading hundreds of CVs. You're kind of looking for one to jump out at you. And I remember this one guy who was Brazilian, who straight away, like, I just love Brazilians. I don't know why. Maybe it's the football thing, but whatever. Straight away, I've elevated him in my head above others. Then I go to his hobby section, and it said he was a semi-professional footballer in Brazil, and we were in like the lunchtime indoor soccer comp at Sydney Uni every Tuesday, and we just kept losing the grand final by like a goal. Like, we were so close to having a winning team. And I saw this guy's CV, and my eyes lit up. I'm like, perfect, amazing. He's going to get us across the line, which is pretty unfair because what has that got to do with his product analytics and A/B testing and experimentation skills? Absolutely nothing. But I that guy, at least in part, got an interview based on his football skills. Not that I asked him to do juggling in the office or anything, but he certainly got a foot in the door. Not really purely based on merit. In the end, we didn't hire him, so I feel like a slightly more meritocratic approach emerged, and we offered the job to what I think was the best candidate. Um, but he certainly got in a way that a candidate who wasn't Brazilian and didn't play football didn't get an opportunity. I feel like AI or some kind of tool could remove that kind of nonsense.
I mean, you could argue that by winning that championship, that boosts the morale of of the team, something along those lines. But I take your point. I think there are biases that are more dangerous. For example, people tend to have affinity for people with similar background, and that's a very unconscious and potentially unfair bias. And AI could also introduce bias, and the case would be career switches. I have to bring back to where we started, because you train. In fact, I would also say a lot of recruiters have this particular bias as well, because what they do is they look at a number of experiences, what level of seniority, and then form a judgment of how good this person is. And I can tell you that I have been rejected to roles because they didn't think that I would have enough technical skills. They look at years of experience in management consulting, in management, and I go, this person can't possibly know how to write SQL statement. And it was very very surprised when I score very highly in SQL tests, not dissimilar to your company's product. And I've also had the complete opposite happen, and people look at my CV and go, this person's too technical. Does he have the managerial experience, leadership qualities, and business acumen to be able to execute these roles? And completely ignoring the fact that not only did I graduate from one of the best business schools in the world, but also worked at a top management consulting firm and as a strategic advisor. So I feel like those biases can exacerbate in the world of AI, because people assume the biases have been removed, but in fact, it if we get 100 resumes being screened by AI, um, at least if it gets screened by an experienced recruiter or experienced hiring manager, they will go, this this is very unconventional, but could be the dark horse. I'm not sure the AI will be able to do that.
Yeah, I feel like it could if it's been prompted to, but
But who's going to prompt it?
well, I feel like maybe this comes almost a step earlier. It's like, what are some of the fundamental issues with the hiring? I feel like one of them is we kind of just jump into it and start hiring without really having thought through exactly who we want and why and what those criteria are and getting that down on paper. And it's in the process of doing that that anyone could be prompted, a human or an AI. But it's just the fact that we often make up this stuff as we go along.
Yes, but also that process you described is fairly rigid and almost by design excludes people who coming from unconventional background or career experience that doesn't fit exactly like that. I mean, look at all the. I can guarantee you, if you look up the job descriptions for 20 data analyst roles or data or analytics managers, they're going to look fairly similar. Bachelor degrees or maybe advanced degrees in statistics and engineering, and followed by 5 to 7 years of quantitative something, depending on the level of seniority. And if it's a managerial role, you'd have to have managed people, certain size teams. They always look like that, right? Plus technical skills. But if you throw a career switcher in there, I don't know how to react to that. It's like, okay, so they don't have 7 years of experience, but they have 5 years experience as a user of the output, or maybe something completely different. The easiest thing for the recruiters to do is just screen that out, because they don't know how to. They have doubts in their head, and sometimes it's justified. Sometimes you lose a gem because of that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's almost slightly myopic to just be fixated on what exactly the criteria are, because you might miss those almost outlier, out of the box candidates, which a recruiter could miss who's too narrow minded, or an AI. Um, it's kind of hard to have it both ways, isn't it? Like, either you have clear criteria, this is what we want, and we're not going to deviate, or you're saying, well, this is what we want, but actually, if you see anyone that stands out for any reason, anyone that kind of looks amazing, then also let us know, and they should get some kind of yeah. In our interview product, we have a similar concept. Like, we have this structured interview plan, ask them all these questions. Here's the score of the interview, but then there's like an X factor section, which is like something that's I don't know, I can't categorize it, but they did something special.
Indeed, yeah.
I feel similar. Like, if we were hiring a software engineer, but they just spent 18 months as a founder of a software product where they did a bit of everything, yeah, that's not in the criteria for an engineering role. But I think, well, they probably learned a bunch of stuff. They probably have a bunch of other skills that we weren't even looking for that actually would be very valuable. And so that kind of thing would definitely be like a X factor bonus points, I think.
Yeah, and another example I can give you is right now I'm working with accounting software, and knowledge of accounting is not on the hiring criteria at all. But I happen to run the finance function of a small business before, and which is the exact target profile that my company's product was supposed to help serve. So having knowledge of the how it works and all the struggles daily they're experienced on a daily basis as a user actually helps me to make the product better. But that's not even in the hiring criteria because, to your point, they those kind of combination of skills would be too rare, and they actually just didn't bother to have it on there.
Um, I'd love to again shift gears a little bit and think about um, a topic that I feel like doesn't get enough airplay in the data science analytics space. It's almost been its own separate domain over the past years, and that is pricing. And so you've got a lot of experience and expertise in pricing and pricing analytics. Um, if you are hiring someone into a pricing analytics kind of role, what kind of character would you look for? What kind of skills do you think they need? Who would you go for?
That's a great question. I've been working in the domain for pricing for a very, very long time. So I started as the one of the global topic expert within BCG, and we served everything from computer hardware, computer software. We did hardware as in hammers and nails. I worked on bread, frozen food, uh, consumer electronics, anything and everything you can imagine. Uh, I've had some sort of interaction or help to serve those industries. And then I spent another 3 years at Telstra. By the way, please don't blame me for the price of your mobile phone bills. I blame Optus. And and after that point, I actually help a number of startups, tech startups in Australia and overseas, sort of especially with their pricing problems and how can they achieve the growth uh, with their growth objectives with a good, well-structured pricing plans. So that's that's the history of me working in this domain. But going back to your question, what makes pricing interesting is it is so multidisciplinary. It's not just about the numbers. You have to understand the product elements because so much of pricing is how do you align the features and values of each um, product or each tier against the pricing. You have to understand the marketing. Like, are you trying to be a premium provider? Are you trying to be a value provider? And that has an element on your pricing. You have to understand psychology of the buyer. It could be a consumer product. It could be a B2B product. B2B product will have more stringent criteria, and some of them might have a tender process, and you need to have an understanding of that. But ultimately, decisions are made by humans, so you need to understand the psychology of the decision makers behind those tenders if you want to be very successful with this pricing strategy. Um, and of course, you do have to understand the numbers because ultimately you want to make profit. And the joke I say is you can always get people to spend $10 by throwing $100 at them. And I've definitely seen promotions that do exactly that. And the sales team and the marketing team go, "Yeah, we achieved our target. Good on us. We achieved something amazing." And then the finance function goes, "Holy crap, what have you done?" And you also have to understand the market dynamics, the elements of game theory in that. What would happen after this particular round of promotions or pricing plans? how are your competitors going to respond? Are you going to trigger a price war? So it is extremely multidisciplinary, and a very good pricing analyst needs to have not necessarily all of that knowledge, because you can't gain that overnight, but you have to have the inquisitiveness to want to learn about all these other things, and you want to be able to communicate and work with your peers, because I already mentioned you're working with finance, with marketing, with sales, with product, and you have to have develop a common knowledge with all those people. And I think that's what makes pricing really fascinating and also challenging at the same time.
Yeah, you've laid out a great explanation there, and you just made me want to get into pricing in my next business, the next role. It is interesting.
Hey, if you need pricing help with me for your business, just give me a call.
Uh, what about adaptability for these kinds of candidates? Willingness to learn. I mentioned those two things just because they're coming up so often in my conversations at the moment, given the rate of technological change, just needing to have that mindset. But it sounds like within pricing as well, because it's so multifaceted, you almost just have to really lean into learning new things as well.
You have to, and certainly in any technology related field, because these industries, whether you're an engineer, whether you're product manager, whether you are a data analyst, AI, the technology is moving so fast. And with the joke in the industry is the report I compile in the morning is already out of date by the afternoon. So you have to have the ability to keep learning and keep developing. But the interesting things, we all did that in our lifetimes, right? So our education systems, everybody in Australia, or at least most of the developed world, you have to go through at least certain number of years of schooling and education. So we all learned basic skills, but somewhere along the line, when we became adult, we lose that ability. The ones that are able to retain that can continue to reinvent themselves and develop new skills and grow in their careers. But some people lose that ability, and they become stagnant. And not always a bad thing. Maybe they're at a stage of their personal life and their career where they're very happy with doing exactly what they do and excel at that function or that level, and they don't need to develop. But I do sometimes wonder, why has this become an issue? Because we all had that skill, and when we were young.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it's, you get to adulthood and you got all this stuff. You got the mortgage, you got the kids, you got the dog, you got the job, and you're just sort of trying to hang on for the ride. That must be part of it. I feel like technology is stealing a lot of our mind space as well now. Like it's so easy just to be watching endless videos on YouTube, on Netflix, and kind of cramming your brain full of crap rather than just sitting there and going, "Oh, what am I going to learn?" For me, one of my favorite books, which I can see over there on the bookshelf, is Atomic Habits. So I've been trying to think a lot about this myself recently, and um, you know, trying to improve and whatnot. I've really tried to embrace the suck recently. So I bought a guitar. I've never played an instrument before. I didn't have your upbringing with the piano, so I've got no idea what I'm doing with the guitar. I can barely put my fingers in the right position. So I'm just like trying to improve and just do something that I'm really terrible at. Taking up tennis as well, and I feel like that's part of the key is just to, yeah, like just accept the fact that when you do something for the first time, you're going to be shit at it, which maybe you don't even notice when you're a kid. Maybe that's part of it. You in this freedom that you have as a child that you don't as an adult.
Yeah, I think, well, consistency is certainly the key to learning any skills. You've got to give it a period of time to get anywhere. Uh, but the bigger issue that you bring up is the prioritization, because we do have 10,000, everybody has 10,000 different things distracting us. And you absolutely can argue they are more important than learning another programming language or doing another instructional videos on AI or how to do prompt engineering. You absolutely are right about those. Uh, the question is, I think that the issue is the forcing function is not there anymore. When you're going through schools, you have no choice. You have to sit in the classrooms. You have got exams that you're trying to pass, and you've got parents pushing down your teachers, looking down you, and you have no choice. You have to do certain levels. But as an adult, that forcing function is removed from your context, from your life, and you have to rely on yourself if you want to, and then overcome all these other priorities are very important in life and decide this is important enough that I have to spend time doing this. I think that is the real challenge.
Yep. And everyone has 24 hours in a day. The world spins in the same way for everyone. So yeah, the I don't have time, I think, is such an easy excuse for anything.
I love Atomic Habit as well. Yeah, unbeknownst to me, before the book ever came out, I actually tried a few of those tricks to get myself into the zone.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I couldn't recommend it highly enough for anyone listening.
What's your favorite trick out of the book?
Well, the ones that spring to mind are just that, like, make it, well, at the moment, I'm more about the bad habits than the good habits. So I'm trying to get rid of some like mindless technology adoption. So it's more about make it difficult, make it invisible. So my iPad and iPhone are now off by default rather than on by default. That's one change I've made because I'm like, I'm only going to turn it on when I specifically have this thing I want to do, as opposed to it's always on. You see what I mean? Locking it in the cupboard during the day, these kinds of things. So yeah, make it annoying, make it invisible, make it hard. I can't remember what the exact phrases were. They're the ones that I'm focused on at the moment. How about you?
So many years ago, I did this to get myself ready for the gym in the morning before work, and of course, getting up at 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning is really challenging. And I used to go to bed wearing my gym clothes,
Nice one.
thinking the rationale is the alarm would go off. When it goes off, and I tell myself, all you need to do is brush your teeth and get out of the door.
Yeah.
And once you've done that, you know, you're halfway to the gym. So that was the initiation I needed to motivate myself to get out of the door. Um, and it took about 2 or 3 weeks before that bedtime or that alarm time became natural to my rhythm, and it wasn't painful anymore. But to get there, that was a mental trick that I needed, just to remove everything that would absolutely possibly stop you from getting out of the door. And that's a very important one as well. The trick is thinking all you need to do is get out of the door. Don't think about going to the gym. Don't think about the workout you're going to do. Your goal is to get out of the door. And once you're out of the door, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to go to the gym, right? You wear gym clothes. So, that was my favorite one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Ben, if you could ask our next guest one question, what question would that be?
Should chief data officers become CEOs? And why? And why not?
That's a great one, and not a question I have asked any of our guests yet. So I'm looking forward to leveling that at whoever our next guest is next week, and I'll let you know what their response is.
Oh, great. Looking forward to that.
Ben, it's been a great conversation today, very wide ranging. We've covered a lot of ground. It's been really interesting. And thank you so much for sharing your insights to the audience, a little bit about yourself as well. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tim. Glad to be here.